sit and ponder, thinking about all I've seen today. Wonder how it all came to this. It's staring, shining back at me, reflections of society. The best and worst are all on display. And someone's crying out, someone's helping out, someone's standing up for what is right. Let me understand just what it's all about. Down what does not serve, let it go, release the hurt, look out and see the wonders of this life. 'Cause it's staring, shining back at me, reflections in your eyes I see, the strength of us uniting is on display. Someone's crying out, someone's helping out, someone's standing up for what is right. Let me understand just what it's all about. I wanna go deeper, I wanna see clearer. Just what it's all about. I wanna go deeper, I wanna see clearer, I wanna be free. I wanna go deeper, I wanna see clearer, I wanna be free. See clearer, I wanna be free. Thank you. Thank you.
When I asked Susan last night if she wrote that recently, she said, yeah, it just seemed to roll off my tongue or roll.
Just washed over
It
me.
just washed over me recently. Wow. Is that a word for an idea for today? I want to go deeper. I want to see clearer. I want to be freer. I want to find a depth to myself that reminds me both of who I am and the part I play in humanity. And I believe it's a calling then for us to find the parts of ourselves that we may not yet have seen. And I can't tell you what those words have meant to me as I just kept, in fact, I have tears in my eyes as I just kept listening to them and allowing them to move through me and to recognize what the calling is again and again. And interestingly enough, we are starting our 7-week series, The Poisoned Arrow. And every fall since I've been here, so this is our, I don't know if it's 18th or 19th season, that we have done one of these called Adventures in Faith, where we want to go deeper into an idea, that we want to see something more clearly and allow it to change us at depth. And it would be very safe for me just to do this, and we will do this, but I want us to look as a community, and I want us to go deeper. And I want us to ask, is there a clarity that is possibly calling us as individuals and collectively into something more? And so I want to start. Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams said, without inner change, there can be no outer change. Without collective change, no change matters. And that's pretty radical. The inner change is vital. I actually believe right now, where we are as humanity, we are being required to both experience and to move through and change within and collectively at the same time. And it's real close to the beginning of the time when we have no choice. Anybody sensing that? We have to make that change. And so this ability for us to gather over an idea and then to go further with it, and also I want to look at a collective change that I believe we're being asked to make also. So we're going to talk about fear. The poison on this arrow is fear. Anybody had fear lately? And we're going to talk about some of those ideas. And when we do, I want to talk about it individually and I want to talk about it collectively. And fear affects our lives and what we do with the fear. So his basic idea, and they're different. He talks about an arrow and he talks about the poison on the arrow. And so this arrow goes in. And anybody not have any woundings here? There are anybody? Okay, you've never been wounded. That's good. We have somebody who, no. Okay, I was wondering. All of us to this point, there's been woundings. There's ongoing woundings. What's interesting is he talks about the poison on the arrow. Because when the arrow goes in, if we will just pull it out and heal from it, we're fine. But that poison in there is the fear that's created as we experience our woundings along our journey. Because we change our stories. We say, well, I'm not enough because of this, or this happened to me, so I can't do that. And we begin to live our stories and the fear, that poison that's in there. You know, he says, the arrows are the wounding that life offers us. And to get to this place in our lives, we've all had them. And that poison is the fear. And that ability to move from there. He writes, in my family's Toltec tradition, we say fear is a great poison. It's at the root of greed, envy, gossip, anger. And he talks about a Buddhist parable. He said, imagine a man walking through a village where he's suddenly struck by a poisoned arrow. Several friends rush to his side, and one runs off to alert the village doctor, who arrives quickly to remove the arrow and administer an antidote. Wait, orders the man. Before you remove it, I need to know who shot me. Where are they from? Why did they do that? What was it, a long bow or a short bow? The doctor and the man's friends look at each other, puzzled, as clearly the man will die from his wound before these questions can be answered. And that was the whole parable. What does it teach us? First, it acknowledges we're going to be wounded. None of us reach adulthood without experiencing at least one significant emotional wound that impacts us greatly. Second, it points out that many of us prefer to ruminate on our wounds, spending hours, weeks, or even decades trying to figure out the causes of our pain. and how to avoid it in the future. How to avoid that pain. And according to Buddhist teachings, too much abstract speculation can be a dangerous thing, distracting us from the practical tasks that lead to healing. Although intellectual answers may seem to give us a sense of control, ultimately the real task at hand is to simply yank the arrow out, allow ourselves to heal, and move on along our journey. I believe, and then he says, I believe that while the arrow's tip may leave a painful wound, it is the poison left behind that presents the greatest danger to our well-being. And that's individually and collectively. And that poison is fear. Fear infiltrates our hopes, dreams, and personalities, becoming the defining factor in our lives until we discover the antidote. And this goes into types of fear and what we do with it, and the ability then to find a different way. Anybody believe that their parents had different types of fear and that they passed on those fears? How many of us, okay, we have two. We have two that did. So I want you to understand these fears that are passed on are generational. So we've not only been blessed, and our parents were blessed, these are multi-generational. So these things have come down to us. And then we get to decide what will we do. If we get short-tempered or defensive all the time, that's basically at some time in our lives, we didn't feel enough, and we learned to push. And that's fear. That's the poison still in us reliving itself. And so there's two types of fear, and I want to go through this. This is all in the introduction in this book, but I want to go through this, and then I want to talk about what does it mean to us. The first type of fear is physical. Physical is the rush of alertness you feel when you see a deer dart across the highway at night, or a bear foraging for food just feet from you. Physical fear can be natural and helpful. It produces adrenaline. It makes you, it does all those pieces. When I remember I went to Key West. My daughter was 18 months old, Lauren, and we got there at, 11:30, almost midnight. We're checking into a hotel. We're walking past the swimming pool, and she jumped in to the bottom of the deep end. And I'll tell you what, it didn't take 2 seconds until I was in the bottom of the pool. Now, she continued to do that, and finally I learned to tell the lifeguard, please don't go in after her, because her favorite place is the bottom of the pool, and eventually she'll come up. She knew how to swim. I taught her to swim. I did the things. But let me tell you, that first time, I couldn't even see anything. And I was just like, okay, there's a child down there. I better go get her. It wasn't, nothing went through my head. Something went through my body. That's that physical movement. It keeps us alive, and it allows us to do what we need to do. And they said in evolutionary terms, physical fear is adaptive, a trait that makes it more likely that you will survive and thrive. So, and that, the sensation is not real pleasant, but it's actually good for us, and it helps us. And it's associated with your body's fight, flight, or freeze response. So it's not a hindrance. And yet I think how nice it would be if we only felt physical fear, because the other type of fear is psychological fear. It's the next 25 times I went to the swimming pool until I really did know we had this down and she was okay and she jumped in, or I was afraid she would jump in. Whether or not she did, the fear walked in there as soon as I hit the pool deck. And it was an over and over again. And that's a little thing, but how many of us live that way? How many of us thought we weren't good enough, we weren't beautiful enough, we didn't have a degree, we looked different, we weren't this, we weren't that, and we live our lives with a psychological fear that says, I need to be perfect, I need to act this way, I need to do this. And we've found that that's where life is. And so finding another way to live within that, finding out who we are, means that life does not have control over who we are. And it doesn't control our future, because right now, much of our fear controls our future and our future happiness. And we have learned to shut down on life and to make sure we protect ourselves from fear in order not to feel that again. How many times have we said, I won't do that anymore because it's too difficult? And it may even be looking in somebody's eyes and saying hello and our name, because they might not respond back, or they might not believe it's the same thing. He said, psychological fear is so prevalent today that many people live in a nearly perpetual state of fear and don't even realize it. Some will deny it, but if you look closely, you'll find that fear is there. I've found when I get angry, there's poison in there, and there's some belief I've had, and in New Thought, we believe that part of this is looking at that old belief and pulling it out and saying, no, that has no power over me. That's not the truth of who I am. This is not to all of it. And so, many fear that they won't succeed financially. Anybody been nervous about what's happening? We live in those fears, and we allow them to do that. And so he said, psychological fear is a corrosive thread that runs through much of our lives. And our physical responses to psychological fear are almost the same as the physical responses to physical fear. And so we find ourselves not connecting as much. That's one of the big pieces. We find ourselves not being authentically ourselves. Anybody in here taught to be a good girl or a good boy? That is actually, as I'm working with this, and I want to move a little bit into some of the other pieces that I want to get to today, and that is the 15 pillars of supremacy culture have to do with that idea of learning to be a good girl or a good boy. Because then you fit in with society, and you don't make conflict. You don't disrupt things. And you're taught to be like everybody else. The problem is when you aren't, we get into some really tough places. And so how do we recognize the fear, realize that it comes from what they call the metote, all the voices of our childhood coming together, and they tell us, you should do this. Anybody have a mother or a father inside their head? Anybody? We can name who it is. And if we can't, we can make up really funny names about who it is. But those voices, that's the metote. It's the noise, and it can get really, really loud. If you went to one of the Blazers game the other night, the noise in there is so loud that it can make us say, I've just got to find a way to live, because that voice, and it could be an old church that said, you have to show up this way or you're not enough. You have to show up this way or you're not enough. But all of these pieces, they are asking us and inviting us to transform. So every time we feel fear individually, it's an invitation to let that go, to let it, my favorite book is still, as far as the title, is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. So this voice says, I'm not supposed to do that. We can look at it. We can pull it up and say, that's the old voice speaking to me. Now, we get to say, is this wise or is it not wise? But when we do, and when we find something more, we will find that we can set that aside. And it can be as far along. I have watched people, when they're in a life-threatening situation, say, I'm not going to allow that to control who I am. Every breath I have, every moment I live, I'm going to live alive and present and available. And when they do, they begin finding a different part of themselves. One of the things I've learned is to name the voice. And sometimes I say, oh, Mom, not right now. And I recognize that she taught me so much wisdom and so much grace, and she came with her voices, and those voices became my voices. And then we find there's something more that we can do, and we can wrestle with. And then I look at the idea of fear in the collective. And I want to talk for a little bit about the collective. And I just invite you to breathe with me. Emily Cady used to say, listen to what's said. You don't have to agree with it or not. Let it go if it doesn't work for you. But part of what I've been doing as my journey as a minister has been inviting the learning And I've been sitting, listening, saying, what does it mean collectively? What is all of this today? What does it have to teach us? I did not come into this time, not to exit this time transformed at depth. And I'd invite you to say, have I been trying to hold it together so that I can just get through? Because we don't want the fear. We don't want the pieces. I want transformation. And I want it for this community too. I don't want to come in I don't want to go out the same way we came in. And I believe all of humanity has to look at that. And so I've been working with some different pieces and some different ideas. Part of it, Desiree Stevens with her 15 pillars of supremacy and finding out what that is, supremacy culture. You may not like the word, but it's a culture that we've been born into. And I began looking at that and I think, oh my gosh. And then I've been working with Reverend David Alexander. And I've been looking at his work that he has been working with ministers, saying, why are all the white churches silent? Why do we move into a time of humanity where there is so much happening and we have a belief that we can't speak of? Dr. Martin Luther King said, privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And that was the philosophy they went with. And then this is what Reverend David said. It is the silence of good intentions, unaccompanied by courageous action. The silence of pulpits that dared not offend. The silence of congregations who long for justice, even affirm it in their prayers, but avoid the discomfort of actually confronting injustice in a public way because some of our people might leave. And in the silence, white churches often mistake niceness for moral clarity and neutrality for spiritual maturity. The silence is not benign. It is not neutral. It is not nonviolent. And I just want us to breathe in that. This has been the hardest time in my life to do messages. I have never struggled more. I have never had more sleepless nights saying, how do I share the truth that we have? That every one of us is an infinite creation of spirit. And know at a cellular level that at some point we have to say, if everyone is an infinite creation of spirit, that means everyone. I grew up in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. And I realized I was very young, but none of the white churches I went to, and they weren't unity, but none of them spoke of the civil rights. I wouldn't have known they were going on in Albany, Georgia, if I didn't learn about it in school later. In Nazi Germany, not one white church spoke about what was happening. What if we've learned to be good? And you know, John Lewis talked about good trouble. What if the wrestling to get free from the fear that has held us back and made us conform to something that wasn't ours to conform to individually is the same fear that keeps us silent and not moving? And I'm still wrestling with this. But I'm also, I don't know if it's stubborn enough or just not afraid because I don't work for a community. I work for my soul and God and the infinite presence and power. I have been praying, Spirit, show me what we're to learn. Not just what I'm to learn, but what we're to learn. One of the interesting things is when communities are quiet, and especially white communities, those that are not, that are other, that don't fit into that category, bear a weight that actually separates them. And I know there's some of you in here who have talked to me about it and what it takes. And it talks about we can pray, but at some point we have to move our feet individually and collectively. And you can say we don't want politics, but what if principle is being politicized? What if everything right now is a call to know a collective? And so I just want us to hold this week. I want us to hold the idea that we came to go deeper, to see clearer, and to find a freedom that we haven't found. But it's going to take breaking open the places that we've said, I'm good if I do this. My house is okay if it looks like this. I'm okay if I look. We have to break that open. And I believe we need to greet fear. We need to greet it, to welcome it, and to invite it in to teach us and transform us. And when we're experiencing it, to say, what is it telling me? And what am I going to do? Because sometimes we have to say, no, you have no power over me. And then I believe we get together and say, what would we like to do as a community to touch the world around us? If we stand in a higher place. And by the way, standing just in prayer is often saying, I'm higher than this. I don't have to do that little battle. None of us are free from this battle right now. We live in this country. And instead, maybe saying, my soul is welcome here because I'm alive and it's a part of my journey. And then to know that every one of us has the ability to love ourselves through all of it. It's messy. It's not fun. I don't like the feeling. I sat home yesterday in bed while all these things were going on here that I was supposed to be at. And I just said, do I have the strength inside to meet the things that scare me and to practice the highest I know anyway? And I believe we're called to meet the fear, to not allow it to shape us and form us, and then to reach out to each other and say, we are more than this. Thank you.